Hi,
Hello,
how is it?
it's good. I'm sitting here in Norwich. It's not as hot as it's been. It's actually a bit rainy outside, which is a shame because we've just come off the back of a heat wave, and it's not quite so nice today. But actually, we probably could do with the rain on the fields around here, because obviously we're an agricultural area in the main in Norfolk, and they've been praying for a little bit of rain. But anyway, perhaps it'll be sunny at the weekend.
Hopefully, over here in Sweden, it's quite nice. I think it's 25 degrees,
Oh
so
wow!
it's
Well, perhaps
it's
I'll need
nice.
to go on a holiday. Although social distance, perhaps won't be able to do that for a while. Social distancing.
So who is Brian? Tell the listeners who is
Uh,
Brian.
well, Brian is an auctioneer. I've been in the property business for about 40 years. Can't quite believe that I've been doing it for that long, but for the last 25, 26 years, I've been purely dealing with auction properties, selling properties at auction. Um, Working initially with a private practice, small company, but then in 2007 stroke 8 launched a brand called Auction House UK. From our head office in Norwich, we had an East Anglian auction room. But then since then, we've opened about 30 auction rooms around the country. So we've now got auction rooms in London, Manchester, Birmingham, Bristol, Glasgow, Cardiff, you name it, Leeds. We've got major centres all the way through the country, but still based in from our head office in Norwich. We franchise those other businesses out, and touch wood, they're all going very well at the present time. Auction House as a brand sells about 20% of all properties going to auction at the moment in the UK. We sell about 3,300 properties through our various auction rooms. So it's quite a significant brand,
Wow.
mainly in the residential sector. Although I think we are even now the second biggest commercial auctioneer as well. So real mix. We sell everything property related, land and yeah, commercial, residential, you name it, we sell it.
Okay, that's you're having a blast this summer or this year during pandemic.
Uh,
I
we've,
can imagine.
yeah, I mean, it's been a strange time. I mean, we last March we sat down with a blank piece of paper and we're talking about Armageddon, and I think we thought we might just about be able to keep going till October and November time, using the resources that we had and the limited income that we thought we might get by the end of the year. I probably worked harder than, or my staff and myself have probably worked harder than we'd ever worked, and we turned in the best 12-month period we've ever had. This year has got busier as well, so we've added extra auctions, and they touch wood, they've gone particularly well over the last few months. Yesterday's auction in East Anglia was one of our best, with 86% success rate, which for us, I mean, we judge ourselves on success rates percentages, and the national average is about 75% success, and we were running on 86, and that's we've still got offers coming in on the unsold lots. So property is still fairly hot at the present time. I think people are feeling a little bit more confident about bricks and mortar and something they can touch and feel and hold, and they're not too sure about where to put their money otherwise. But banks aren't giving you any interest to speak of, and investments. Even some of them brand names that you know and love are suddenly disappearing by the wayside. The typical
Yeah.
high street shops are not going well, so people see a property you can touch and hold, and the investment rates you're getting from an investment property going well above what they would earn with the money elsewhere. So we've found auctions this last 2 years has been particularly strong, and I think it's going to continue for a while. We're still sort of smarting over, social distancing and how that's going to affect our business. But and who knows what's coming around the corner. But I think now we've sorted out how to bid online, and that seems to be working well. So we don't have to stand in a stuffy hotel room with 300 or 400 people. You know, this online world is now a really successful way of selling property.
So going back to what you mentioned online, how does the online auction work
Oh golly, that's
comparing
yeah.
to traditional?
There's a traditional auction room was very straightforward. You just hired a room and put a load of people in it, and you could see them and take the bids from them, from the people in the room, and you could feel the atmosphere. And it was as an auctioneer, I used to love that. This is a little bit more clinical now. We have two forms of auction. We have the typical on eBay style widget, press a button type auction where you don't see the auctioneer, you don't see anything or any of the activity behind the scenes, and you get typically 30 seconds or a minute to be able to press the button after someone else has pressed it, and you just bid online on your computer like you do on eBay, but it's a timed auction, and you can just keep bidding until you're the last person online. But the one we particularly favor and we're working with now in most of our auction rooms is what we call live stream auctions, which is where you see me as an auctioneer or one of my colleagues, and we're selling the properties live online, and we'll have telephone bids from colleagues who are in the office, and we'll have online bidding where again you can press the button, but you will see the auctioneer offering that property, so you feel a little bit more comfortable as a buyer that you're being dealt a fair hand. So you know when he's got a telephone bid or an internet bid or a proxy bid. If you can't bid online or you can't get to a telephone, then the auctioneer will take effectively a proxy bid from you. So he will bid up to that bid but not beyond it, and obviously try and buy the property for less money than your proxy. That's one of the things that we've found has worked well. But typically we used to have an auction with, for our area, 250 to 300 people in the room. Now we're having
Wow.
1,000 people watching online. Our London auction room had 10,000 people watching their auction the other day.
Wow.
So over the period of several hours actually. The difficulty from us as an auction company is that it takes longer to offer a property online than it does in the room, because you have to wait for someone on the telephone to make up their mind. And some people don't press the button as quickly as you would like them to, but it's something we run at about 10 to 12 an hour, I suppose, selling properties online, whereas we used to sell about 17, 18 an hour when we were in the room, because it's more immediate and you can react quicker. I don't see us going back to the room at this moment in time, even if the hotels and football clubs, which is where we often have these auctions, even if they open their doors to us, because I think a lot of people won't want to stand in a stuffy room with a load of people. I think being on the end of a phone or on the end of a computer is quite convenient for them,
Yeah.
and you can bid from anywhere. I mean, we had a gentleman bidding, I think it was from Taiwan, in a previous auction, and New Zealand and Canada and Portugal. We've had people bidding from all over the world on the lots that we've got into our sales.
Yeah. So basically, then the hotels and football clubs should be like worried because you won't be renting their venue
Don't
anymore.
see that happening. I know there is a move from one or two people to want to go back to a proper auction room. There are some traditionalists who like to be able to see the people they're bidding against, but I don't think the rooms are going to be half as full as they were before. And as one of my builders who was bidding yesterday, he was at work. He was on a construction site, and he was able to bid whilst he was standing, on the construction site. Within, a few minutes, he'd bought his property, and he could move on and still be at work. Otherwise, he would have had to take a day off work to come to an auction room to then bid, and he might not have got the property that he was after, and he'd wasted a lot of time. So it's encouraging more people get into the position to bid. So I'm very happy with this. It's moved the business on a lot, actually. I mean, some things have come out of COVID which have been positive rather than negative, and for us, it's made our business more accessible for more people. And we're certainly finding lots more people from further afield are bidding on the properties that we've got. In some of our areas, East Anglia, Cumbria, Devon and Cornwall, we're finding a lot of people are buying from abroad, from other parts in the country, because they can see that what they're buying are good investments. They're producing good yields, or there's opportunities to flip and turn the properties they're buying.
Sorry.
Let's carry on.
So what should you think of when you're buying on a traditional auction comparing when you're buying online? Do you have any tips?
Oh golly, yeah, loads. Traditional auction, I mean, it's the same more or less. I think that I think if you're buying for the first time auction, obviously do your homework, make sure you know what you're buying. You're not being sold something where there's issues, and get to know your auctioneer, and talk to the people selling the property, because they want you to be a repeat customer. So they're not going to try and stitch you up, or they can't, because they have to be honest with what they're telling you, because obviously they want you to buy that property, but they also then want you to come back. A lot of our buyers become sellers become buyers. We get a lot of repeat clients coming back to us. So I would say, if you're interested in something, do speak to the auctioneer and say, well, what do you think about this property? Tell me what you think the possibilities are here. So that's one tip in terms of buying at auction, and that's the same whether it was in a room or online. The other thing I think you need to always have at the back of your mind is, what's the exit route? If you're buying something, is there a quick get out of jail card on that property? Could you then turn that round and sell it? Could you rent it? Is there a market for it? Speak to an independent agent about what you've bought, so that they can say what it could be worth if you've improved that property, or what the maximum rent might be, because often you'll see properties in an auction where the rents aren't particularly high, and there could be uplift in rents which would add value. And I think if you're starting for the first time, start small and work up. One of my long-term clients started buying garages, empty lock-up garages to put cars in, and because they're low cost, low maintenance, and in terms of yields, you're going to be turning a pretty good yield. Most garages will rent out for about 10% of their value.
Oh wow!
So and a garage might only cost £3,000 to £10,000 depending on where it is. So an investment in garage is often a good starting point to build up a portfolio of property. Garages also often are sitting on land which might have a greater value in the future for development. And that's what this particular client I'm thinking of, he bought lots of garages over the years, and then proceeded to get planning consent on the sites for residential properties. So it uplifted his value over the years. But he always had that trickle of income coming in from the people who rented his garages. The only money he ever spent was perhaps putting the odd new roof or garage door on, but there's no real big cost in that. So that's a way of easing yourself into the property market. Land is obviously also something which a lot of people buy first time round, because they don't make land anymore. So it's a good long-term investment. It's always going to be there. The market goes up, goes down, but land has also always got a value. There's always some way of uplifting the value of a piece of land by even just getting a stable on it and putting a horse on it. That might uplift the value. if you get planning for houses on it, then that's a bonus. But it's low entry because you're not paying for a site with planning if you're buying a piece of empty land. But obviously, if you've got a bit more money and a bit more access to buying properties, then I would be looking at yeah, the typical basically modernized houses and flats, and so that you can do the work fairly easily and cheaply. Don't take on major projects as a first project. Be very careful what you invest in, because costs will run away with themselves, but be in control of your costs. And obviously be very hands-on if you're buying for the first time. Don't tend to employ people, because as soon as you employ people, it costs you money.
Yeah.
And a lot of the expense that you get with property is labor.
Yeah.
Finding a good builder is not very easy.
Okay, so that was really good tips. So you mentioned that you said overseas buyers are buying. How do they do it? Do they ask like you or someone in your team if it's a good property and all of this? Because you said they need to have like an exit, or
Yeah.
do they just park their money? Or
Okay, there's lots of questions in there. Certainly, if I wasn't local, I would be trying to find a local representative who knows what they're talking about and knows the area, knows the type of property. I do think people do get led into buying the wrong sort of stock in poor areas because it looks cheap, and if it looks cheap, you've got to ask yourself, why is it cheap? There's certainly a lot of investment companies pushing north property, low value terraced houses in the north, because they look on the face of it a cheap investment, but the reason why they're cheap is often because the tenants are not necessarily poor and not necessarily good, and you might be buying a tenanted property with a false investment income. And so be very wary about that, and that's why I would always speak to a local agent in the area that you're hoping to buy for to find out the real true background on that property. But because we have branches all over the country, we are seeing the fallout from that, where people have bought properties through London auction rooms thinking a terraced house is cheap at 45, 50,000 pounds, because it looks on the face of it as though it's pulling in 12 to 15% yields. When they actually buy the property, go and see it, they find that the tenant has done a moonlight flit, and the normal rent in that area is only £250 a month, not £450 a month, and the property's only worth 30,000, not 45. So they're immediately taking a loss. So if I was investing in the UK, I would just make sure that before you part with any money, make sure the local agent thinks it's worth the money you're paying for it. I
yeah,
think one of the good things that has come out of this sort of recent period is that most of the properties we now sell, we do more comprehensive video tours, more photographs, more upfront information about the properties, and we are able to do individual appointments for people rather than group appointments. So you can have someone view the property and ask the relevant questions. But coming back to that get out of jail card, that is always something that I would have at the back of my mind when I buy a property. Am I going to flip it? In other words, buy it and then sell it straight away without doing a great deal? Am I going to hold it? In which case, I'm going to hold it and rent it, take an income. What's the income going to be? Is it better than I would be getting in the bank? Or if it's a long-term hold, or it's a do-up and then either sell on or drop into a rental portfolio. You just need to know that you've got a builder or maintenance person who actually is going to keep the costs low and look after and not spend more than the property is worth. I see a lot of people who buy things thinking, oh, well, I'll spend 5, 10, 15,000. And then by the time they're finished, they've spent 20 to 30,000 because there's lots of other add-on costs which they haven't thought of whilst they're doing the project. So always be brutal with yourself in terms of what you're going to pay. Probably be a little bit high on what you expect to spend. And as long as the sums still work, then it's worthwhile bidding.
Okay, good answer. So, who is buying in this boom? Is it first-time buyers or is it experienced buyers or what? That's demographic.
It's a real mixture. We're getting quite a few. The bank of mum and dad helping out family, yeah, but equally first-time investors. We're getting a lot of people who are sitting with pots of money from pension pots, not knowing what to do with that money, and the people are trading because they can see there's a market out there for buying property and either holding it or flipping it. The market going up has helped because as house prices have risen by 10% in the last year, roughly on an average. You know, if you bought a property at £100,000, it's worth 110, and you've done absolutely nothing. So people have risen on, they've ridden on the back of a really strong property market. But I think there's money to be made. We tend to, you know, as auctioneers, discount our prices from what I'd call open market prices by about 15 to 20%. So
Oh, wow.
our guide prices are probably 15 to 20% below open market price. But our job then is to work the price back up. So we want to get back to more or less market value if we can. But every auction we have, there's always a few bargains amongst the lots that we sell. There's 3 or 4 yesterday, and I think if I'd had the money to be able to invest, I would have bought them. But you can't buy through your own auction, at least we don't. And you know, if I had a few £1,000,000, I would have probably bought some property yesterday. And that's you know, the art is spotting those ones which are bargains. The problem is, again, a lot of first-time investors go for the ones which look popular, which are popular, and everybody's after. And so because everybody's after those ones, the price goes high. What you need to do is spot the ones which aren't particularly popular and not going to attract lots of interest, because generally they'll go for less money. So the ones which look cheap in the first instance aren't necessarily going to be cheap by the time you've bid on them, and you can get carried away with bidding too much. You know, I would say that's all about homework. And I will also say in a collective sale, there's, you know, of 50, 60, 70 properties, which is typical for us. There's probably 4 or 5 properties of each different type. So don't just look at one property, look at several. And if you miss out on one, then there's always another one to go after. If you put all your eggs in one basket and you miss out, then you've got to wait another period before the next one comes up for sale. We have an auction every 6 weeks, more or less, a collective auction. So you've got to wait for the next collective sale. Like our next auction in this region is on the 28th of July. So we're now starting to list properties for that particular sale. But we have roughly 250 sales a year around the country. So there's always a sale coming up. But it's identifying an area, and I would probably suggest to people that they pick an area of the country which is the area they want to focus on, and stay in that area. Don't try and buy property all over the country, because it is far more difficult to manage. It's better to have a portfolio in a confined space. Pick a good managing agent to look after it, or be able to look after it yourself. Then you're going to be able to keep your costs down by having the same people look after those properties for you.
Yeah, good answer. So going back to what is guide price and reserve price, if you could explain that to the listeners and the viewers.
The guide price is set to encourage interest. We want you to go, oh wow, that's cheap, and you then get engaged. You look, people will look at these properties and hopefully, from our point of view, get excited by what we've got to offer. And once you're hooked in, that guide price is just to draw you in, but the reserve price has to sit within our guide. So if we've got a guide of £60,000 to £70,000, the maximum the reserve can be is £70,000. We can't put a reserve at 75, so it's got to be within that guide price. And if it's a fixed guide, it has to be within 10% of it. So if it's a guide price of £70,000, the maximum reserve could be at 77. It's not to say that it is. Often the reserves can be at the bottom of the guide or even below the guide, but it can't be above those guides. So fixed guides 10% above. A range guide, it has to sit within that. We generally don't set the final reserve until the day before the auction, once we know what amount of interest we have had in that particular property. It can't. It's meant to be a general attraction guide to attract the interest. There was 2 or 3 properties which sold at bottom end guide and in fact even below guide in yesterday's auction. So it doesn't mean to say it's going to go way beyond it, but I think if you look at the results of a lot of auctioneers at the moment, a lot of the prices are drifting towards the top end of guide or even above at the moment. That's a lot to do with the market that we're in at the present time, not necessarily to do with the properties that we're offering.
Okay. So why do you think auction have gained so much in popularity during COVID?
A lot is to do with the efficiency of it. The problem at the moment, we're hearing all the time, is that the conveyancing and legal system is so clogged up at the moment, and lending is so difficult that the average time for people to agree a sale to get completion is running at something like 20 weeks, 4 or 5 months. Ooh. Just to buy a property through the normal system, whereas auction is very immediate. We will put a property into auction with 3 weeks to go before the auction date. A legal pack is provided, so you can read that through, you can do all your inspections. On auction day, the hammer comes down, so a contract is formed, and 28 days later, or sometimes 14 days later, the property's yours. So if you're a trader in the property sector, if you're dealing with the property market, and that's how you're making your money, you can turn your money that much quicker. You're not having to wait so long to buy and sell properties. And that's why a lot of people prefer the auction process. They like the immediacy of it. They like the speed of and certainty of buying the property under that basis. If it's taking you 5 months to agree to buy and then and complete, you can only sort of like do 2 properties a year with the same amount of money. With auction, you can obviously churn your money a lot quicker, so you're earning more money if you're buying and selling on. So again, a lot of traders get involved in the auction sector because of the speed and the fact that they don't want to wait.
Yeah, I can understand why. So, if can you change the date of the completion day, or is it always 28 days or 14?
We're finding that more buyers are requesting extended completion dates because of the financial issues that you get. About a third of the properties we sell are to people who need mortgages or loans. And often it's those people who are struggling to hit 28-day completion dates. So what we are doing, where people have requested an extension to completion, as long as the vendor doesn't mind, we can agree that in advance of the auction. So don't wait until you've bought something and then ask the question, because the vendor might say no. But prior to an auction, if you want to request an 8-week completion rather than a 4-week completion, then it's worth putting in writing, asking the auctioneer to ask for permission to extend that completion date, because that just enables you to have that bit of comfort with regards to the banks and building societies if there is a bit of a delay. You have to be served a 10-day notice to complete anyway, so effectively you do get to 2 extra weeks beyond the 28 days that a lot of auction properties completions are fixed for. So there is that little bit of comfort if you're going to drift over that completion by a few days. But if you want a longer completion date, then request it before auction, and you may get it. Some of the particular banks and traders we deal with will only work on 14-day completion. So make sure you've read the legal pack. Because you've got to be a purely cash buyer in that set of circumstances.
Yeah. And what happens if the buyer don't complete in time then?
Oh yeah, that's dangerous. If they don't complete on time, they get served this notice to complete 10 days, and if they then don't hit it, they will lose their deposit. 10% will be lost straight away, and potentially, if the vendor can't sell that property for the same amount of money, you risk having costs awarded against you. So only bid if you know you're going to have access to that money. It's an important factor that some people don't get. Although in the last sort of 5 years, I've probably only had 3 or 4 cases where it's been taken, the deposit's been taken, and generally that's because the person's not been able to get borrowed finance. Because they've underestimated the amount of work that needs doing. It tends to be a naive people who haven't looked into the financial situation, rather than sort of someone coming up with something difficult. We had a case where someone wanted to buy commercial premises, and got a loan approved. A loan approved by the bank in principle, but then the bank, once they came and looked at it, decided that wasn't suitable for lending, and they lost £17,000 straight away. And
Wow.
it was a very costly exercise for them. Sorry about the background noise I've got in the office here. It's obviously lunchtime downstairs behind me, and they're obviously chattering away. But hopefully you can
Yeah.
still hear me.
Yeah, I can hear you. I can hear you.
Good, good.
So is there in any circumstance where you can withdraw from a purchase on auction?
Only no, it's a binding contract. So effectively, the only way to be released from that contract is with the approval of the vendor. If the vendor accepts that there is a reason for you to withdraw, but that's very, very rare. But generally, the reason they've come to auction to sell is they want a quick sale and they want to get the money in the bank. A contract is a contract. The only way to extricate yourself is either walking away from the money that you've already paid and shrugging and moving on because you think you've bought the wrong thing, or you come to an agreement with the vendor. I've had that fairly recently, where someone unfortunately fell ill in between exchange and completion. They'd exchanged contracts and unfortunately found out that they had cancer, so they didn't want to complete purchase, genuine reasons, and they came to an agreement with the vendor that they gave them 5% of their 10% deposit back, and
Yeah.
it saved them a little bit of money, but it was understandable. But the vendor still took 5% to cover their costs. We resell the property fairly quickly afterwards, mind you. But you've got to know that if you're getting into property, it's a very cut and dried business. It's not like having a few weeks to think about it like you get with buying property through a normal estate agent.
Yeah. So is it true that you can take offers from the wall? And may you always do this?
Well, I mean, we are entitled to bid on behalf of the vendor up to the reserve. So if we've got a reserve of £120,000 and there's one bidder and the bidding stops at 116, well, I've got an active bidder who still wants to buy and they still want to bid, and I'll bid it up to 119. And if they want to bid 120, they do. If they don't, then fair enough, it's not sold. But we can't bid beyond the reserve. So there is a reserve on most properties. If there's a nil reserve or no reserve, we'll always announce that fact. And we can't sell for any less than the reserve. So I mean, it is a case of you bid until you reach the level which you feel you're comfortable with, and if that's still not enough to tempt the vendor to sell, the best thing to do is then make an offer afterwards at the level that you want to pay if it's withdrawn. We sold 86% properties. There weren't many left over yesterday, so you may not have been lucky with a post-auction offer. But some clients just trawl all the unsold lots and make low offers after auctions. because they think that the vendor is going to be most vulnerable at that stage. And that might be a policy that, you want to look at all the unsold lots and start making offers on those, because that's actually is when vendors are most keen to sell. They've just failed to sell in an auction room. And they often will come down from their expectations the day after.
Yeah. So that was a great tip. So how does pre-auction work, and what's the difference with the rules with pre-auction, and can the vendor decide by themselves?
Yeah, I mean, any offer, we're legally bound to put any offer pre-auction to the vendor. So whatever offer you make prior to auction, we put forward, and the vendor can either choose to say, no, I don't want to take any offers pre-auction, or they might turn around and say, well, I won't accept that price, but I will sell it, and they'll give you the price they will sell pre-auction at. But you've probably got to expect that figure that you're going to offer prior to auction has got to be at a level where the vendor thinks it's at least as good as he was going to get on auction day. Otherwise, what's the point of him selling prior? He might as well let it run to auction. So you're not going to buy something cheap probably prior to auction. Making a pre-auction offer is a way of declaring your hand. So you're giving away a little bit about what you're prepared to pay for that property. So he's not likely to put the reserve any less than your pre-auction bid. So a pre-auction bid is worthwhile, but sometimes it's a way of educating a vendor about bringing his reserve down. I have clients who will put pre-auction offers forward with a specific reason to reduce the vendor's expectations, so that on auction day his reserve is not going to be at the top of the guide, but it might be at the bottom of the guide, because pre-auction offers coming in at the bottom of the guide encourages a vendor to think he may not get quite as much. So it's a way of perhaps bringing that reserve down. I think the other thing I would be doing, certainly if an offer is turned down prior to auction, is suggesting or asking whether the vendor would consider an underwritten bid. Underwritten bids are, in a way, it's a way of securing a property prior to auction. The property still goes to auction, but if at the auction the property sells for more money, you split the uplift with the vendor. So I'm going to have to explain that a little bit better, because that didn't really sort of. If a property, I'll pick a particular example in this particular auction. We had a shop and a flat which we had a pre-auction offer of £160,000 on that particular property prior to auction, and bearing in mind the guide price was 130 plus, so it was quite a lot over the guide. And the vendor was keen to take that offer of 160, but we thought that might make a bit more in the room. So what we said to the purchaser is sign an underwriting agreement, which binds him to that offer of 160. So if the property was going to make £160,000 on auction day, if nobody else bid, it was still going to make 160, and as a purchaser, he would have had to pay £160,000. Having said that, it goes to auction, and that particular property sold for 170,000. So it made £10,000 more than what this person has agreed to buy that property at. But what the vendor then had to do is split that uplift of £10,000 with the underwriter. So the vendor, he got a little bit more money, so it was worthwhile him underwriting it. And then the underwriter got a check effectively for doing absolutely nothing. He could have continued to bid himself, and he would still be getting roughly 50% of that money back. So it's like it ensures the vendor is not going to get any less than that price. So that so he's underwritten at £160,000. He knew he was going to get no less than that, irrespective of what else happened. But the underwriter has walked away with a check in his hand for effectively doing nothing other than signing the piece of paper. So he either got it at the price he want to pay, or he gets a check. Now, underwriting happens not at every auction. Some auctioneers don't use it. We don't use it very often. But if you make a pre-auction bid and they turn it down, it's often worth asking the question: would the vendor underwrite at that level? because if they are prepared to underwrite at that level, it guarantees the vendor that price. He's not going to get less, and there's a chance he might earn more. From your position as a buyer, you exchange contract or you sign a contract, you know you're going to get it at that price, or you might just get some money back if you at the end of the transaction if it sells for more money. And if you want to continue to bid, so you want to bid higher, you will get that money off the purchase price. So it's a win-win situation from both sides. It's insurance policy effectively, and it just gives you that opportunity to possibly buy a property in a slightly lower price than you would normally have to pay.
That was a really good tip. So, moving on, when you place the properties on the catalog, is there in any particular order or is it just random?
No, we spend a lot of time deciding on what properties to put where in an auction catalogue. Generally, the most popular lots are going to be right at the beginning and right at the end. You know, just to keep the interest at the end, but you want the auction to start off as positively as possible from an auctioneer's perspective. If you don't sell the first 3 lots, it looks pretty negative. So you're going to find that the first 3 lots are going to be saleable lots they should be saleable lots, and they're probably going to sell for a lot of money. So are they good ones to bid on? Probably not, because you're going to probably have a lot of competition on those first 3. But then we probably would pick 2 or 3 properties where they may not have quite so much interest, and then we'll have another good one, and then we might, you know, so we tend to go through waves in the auction. Good ones, not quite so good ones, not, to keep the flow of the auction going. Lot order does come into play. The bigger the auction, the more difficult it is perhaps to understand the lotting. But I think you've just got to look at each property on its merits, decide if that's for you, and if it is, do your research and have your figures in mind. But perhaps be less expected. You might expect not to get the first 1 or 2 lots if you've got lots of other people to bid against.
Okay, so are there any hidden fees people should be aware of?
Yeah, most auctioneers have what they call administration charge, which is basically a charge for the provision of the legal packs and dealing with the finances on taking deposits and money laundering and other things like that. So there's normally an administration charge roughly between £750 and perhaps £1,500. There may be costs recoverable like searches. So again, you've got to look at the special conditions of sale to see what costs there are in those special conditions. There might be a buyer's premium. That's the thing to be aware of, and probably most wary of, I suppose, is that's often where the vendor is recovering some of their costs from you as a purchaser. So a buyer's premium might be to cover the 1%, 2% fees that they're paying to us as agents, but that's all connected and contained within those special conditions. That has to be declared, it has to be written, and it has to be provided before the auction date. But that is so important. But we limit our recoverable fees to a certain level. We will not charge some of the back end fees that a lot of the auctioneers are doing at the moment. I've heard as much as 4 and 5% that some auctioneers will charge at the back end, and that obviously is costing buyers a lot of money, because it's not, you can't mortgage a buyer's premium. It's not something you can add to the costs. So I would be very wary of that type of auction environment.
Okay, so where do you see people do wrong in auction?
Oh, wrong. Not do their homework prior to the event. You know, buying something they don't wholly know what they're buying. Not do their initial research about the escape route. You know, what is the get out of jail card? And I just think that's a big question that a lot of people don't ask themselves. They get carried away with what the opportunity is, but rather than look at what happens if the costs go up and the market changes, and can I sell this quickly, and or can I get a higher rent? If I can't sell something, is there a good enough rental income to cover the finance costs? But short leases are always an issue in terms of leasehold properties. Buying a freehold property is relatively straightforward. You know what you get. But with a leasehold property, leases often are, particularly thick, got strange clauses, ground rents uplifting every 25 years, again, can be quite considerable, and that might be a reason why that property is cheap in the first place. A lease any less than 70 years, 65, 70 years on a flat can be dangerous to buy that type of property, because funding, getting that refunded in the future is also potentially very difficult. But the negatives are probably common sense. It can be overcome by common sense. And if you're buying right, and you've done your homework, a lot of people make an awful lot of money out of property. And I think that we are constantly seeing people come back time and time again, buying on our auctions and doing extremely well.
Yeah.
Yeah, we've got one or two stories where people have come unstuck, but not masses. Most people, if they're investing in property and they've got a little bit of nous, do okay, and don't fall out of bed, in terms of a profitable situation. Those coming back with a decent return, and they stay in it. We don't lose too many people along the way.
Yeah. So what type of properties goes fast, and what is the trends in this market?
In this market, well, because there's a shortage of property wherever you are, there is a great buy-to-let opportunity still, for people to buy and rent stock, and rents have gone up over the last few years, and the yields have gone up. So I think that sector of the market is still worth investing in. Location still comes into it. I think one of the opportunities moving forward will be in the secondary commercial areas. That I know that's not necessarily straightforward, but shops and uppers are areas where you can earn good returns. And as some of these peripheral commercial areas are being turned into residential, because there isn't the take up for small shops as much as there used to be, a lot of the local authorities are now allowing some of the commercial property to be turned into residential. There are opportunities that you can look at. If you're near a university, if you're near a hospital, if you're near an area of employment, you're always going to be able to sell those properties or rent those properties out. So again, buying in the middle of nowhere is not necessarily the right thing to do. But I would certainly say there is, a market wherever you go, anywhere in the country, and it's all about price. If you buy at the right price, you'll sell at the right price, and you'll rent out at the right level. I mean, there's so many different types of property that go through the auction environment, and have benefits in different ways for different people. So I don't think you can generalize particularly easily.
Okay. So as you're aware of, you said we're in a boom as well. So what tips can you share as an investor, what we should do during this boom?
Oh, this boom.
Like tips.
Well, it's a difficult one to be specific. I can look through it, any catalogue and see properties which are cheap in the marketplace at that time. If it looks as though there's a change in the market and it's a negative one, if for instance we do get into a situation where the market suddenly does dip, and don't think it will, because I think that there is no incentive at the moment for interest rates to go shooting through the roof, or the government to change their policy. And so I think it's reasonably secure. But if it was to happen, you've got to think either is this a short-term investment for you, or medium or long-term investment? Don't make rash decisions if because the market will potentially might come down, but it will go back up again in years to come. But you've got to be able to be in the financial position to buy and hold. But if it looks as though it's changing, it's going to change, and you want to make sure you've got that exit route to sell that property on as quickly as possible. Be prepared to take a small loss rather than hold out for the again if the market is going down. Often people will follow a market down. That it's a fault that happened in 2008 where people would not drop their prices quick enough to get out. But actually, if you hold on to property, there's always going to be a shortage of properties because populations grow, and so eventually the market will return. It's just the cost of finance which will drive it. If interest rates stay relatively low, and I think all the predictors are that interest rates will stay low. If you've got interest rates at 1%, 2%, 3% even, as long as you're earning 7%, 8%, 9% yield on your rental property, you're ahead of the game. Only like back in the 1980s or whatever it was, when interest rates were 15%, that's when things went awry. But a lot of people handed their keys back on properties, and look where the prices are now to where they were then. If you'd have held on to those properties and found a way of holding on to the properties, you will eventually make money and come back and be in a positive situation.
That's a good answer. So I have just one question that I ask all my listeners.
Go on.
So, one book that you could recommend?
Oh golly, I don't have time to read books. Oh golly, I mean, John Howard, who I know you've had on here before, will tell you to read his books about buying, his experience of buying and selling properties at auction. I think life experience books that if you'd have warned me about this, there is a book that I've read, and I'm desperately trying to think of that particular person.
No worries. I have another question.
It's in America. I will send you the link after this. It was something that was given when I was I went to a conference in America. About 10 or 15 years ago. It was in Las Vegas, and this chap came up, and he was one of the speakers, and he made so much sense. But the essence of it, he was saying, is have confidence in your own abilities. Don't trust anybody else, but be yourself and follow your instincts, because generally your instincts are the best thing to follow. But take the advice from others, but make your own decisions. He made a lot of sense, and I think a lot of people listen to other people and make decisions based on what other people are saying rather than really looking at themselves. He was saying, if you put the effort in yourself, you will get the rewards. And I get that, and I mean, I think the same with our business. We've grown it because we've put the effort in, and our clients who we deal with have become friends over the years rather than just business associates, and they've grown their portfolios and their property holdings with us, and worked with us, and we want to see them succeed. We have a lot of repeat clients, people who come back to us all the time. Happy to speak to any of your clients if they have any questions. More than happy to find us on the Auction House website. My name's obviously Bryan Baxter. You know that, you've introduced me, but if you find me in LinkedIn, I'm happy to exchange conversations with you about anything to do with property, or put you in contact with anyone else through our network of auction rooms.
Perfect. I was supposed to ask you that, but you did the plugging yourself,
Oh, I
and
like a
gave them
good
where they
plug.
can find you. You were ahead of me.
Yeah, good. I like, I'm trying to read your mind.
But Bryan, thank you very much for taking your time
No
during
problem.
this busy pandemic property auction period. I know you have a lot on your stuff on your plate. So I'm very grateful that you took the time to educate people that might be interested or are interested in doing property auctions.
Yeah, no, I mean, it's a really exciting environment to be in. It's a lot. It's a quicker, more straightforward process, and it takes a lot of the angst out of searching for properties because they're all in one place, and they are aimed at the trade and people who want to deal with property rather than someone who's just trying to find their forever home.
Yeah. And with that, my guests and listeners and visitors will end it like that. Don't be stressed. Invest, people.
Good.